Hello and welcome to today's Manhattan Project presentation, A Council of Reason for Diplomacy and Economic Development. That's our title, and that's what we'll be discussing today. What we're referring to by Council of Reason is a proposal that's just been penned by Helga Zepp-LaRouche. It's a project that has been being worked on for the past several weeks. And in the beginning of her call, she states, in judging the outlook from the recent NATO summit in Washington, which defined Russia as the most significant and direct threat, China as a systemic challenge for the Euro-Atlantic security, and generally a perspective of a global NATO, there seems to be no place anymore for diplomacy and dialogue as a means to resolve conflict. Well, Washington, D.C., which just hosted the unfortunate speech of Benjamin Netanyahu, and also the NATO summit, clearly doesn't seem to be the place for dialogue and discussion. Yes, many people are going through there, but as we know, the presidency of the United States itself is under assault, under siege. That's not something that people like to popularly say. It's being said only in the corners or the interstices. People prefer to think they are thinking in partisan terms about what the Republicans are doing and what the Democrats are doing, and whether or not Trump schemed to get himself shot, or the Democrats tried to kill Trump, or various of these things, which are the sort of soap opera diversions that may have once amused children in the 1980s, but shouldn't be the subject of the discourse of today's politics at all, because it's a very serious situation. It's a situation in which the American presidency, while it has not disappeared, of course, it's a major institution, in fact, the most important, in one sense, executive authority institution in the world. But who's running it is actually at the moment, maybe not anybody's guess, but those who think they know don't, and those who know aren't saying. Meanwhile, those who have to know in various parts of the world, and the corridors of power in various parts of the world, have no choice but to be very guarded and prepared for virtually anything. That's not a world in which you want to live when you've got thermonuclear weapons at the ready. It's a very, very dangerous world, a world that's actually more dangerous than it has been since any time since the 1960s, and maybe even including the 1960s. Yesterday, or excuse me, over the last 3 days, Helga Zepp-LaRouche, in various ways and instances, has been asked questions both about what's happening in the United States, what's happening internationally. What we're going to do today is to try to see if we can provide some answers. And so we'll start first with an exchange that Helga had with Harley Schlanger, spokesman for the LaRouche organization. And this was on her Schiller Institute platform. There was a discussion process, and she had a few things to say.
Well, it seems as though a number of people out there share the concern with what's going on in the United States. I have a couple of questions for you on that. Someone wrote in and said, as a former Democrat, it looks to me that the Biden withdrawal was pre-planned, a kind of soft coup to get him out to make sure that a new age woke Democrat wins. The donor class was behind this. What do they want? And someone else asks, well, cui bono? Who is behind the drive to get Biden out? And then we also have a question, do you have any idea who has the nuclear codes for launching an attack, given that it's probably not Biden? So there are some questions for you from the United States.
Well, that is a very, very some discussion. I mean, we raised that already, immediately when the discussion around Biden's condition took the headlines, that if it's not Biden, who is running the United States? Then, somebody answered, somebody from the Biden team said, don't worry, Biden has a very excellent team. That is not exactly reassuring, because nobody knows who that team is exactly. You know, I mean, some of them are naturally known, but you know, if somebody who has not the constitutional power to have these codes indeed does have access to them, then you know the world peace is in jeopardy. So I don't know. You know, we were looking at this Biden problem, and I think you know the big donors of both parties, of the DNC and the Republican leadership, they seem to have a very, very large role in deciding how things go. And you know, in a certain sense, as long as you have a situation where a congressman gets, I don't know what the price is these days, needs 5 million minimum to run a congressional campaign, normally coming from Wall Street. For a senator, it's already significantly more. And for a presidential campaign, we are talking at this point, I think, reaching somewhere, you know, in the billions. I don't know, I don't have the exact figure, but it's an awful amount of money. And the people who are the so-called big donors, they are very much the same thing like what people generally call the deep state, or the MITI-MEC, as Ray McGovern calls it. And I think in any case, you know, until we have a return to the principles of the American Revolution, the American Constitution, the idea of America as a republic with a foreign policy like that of John Quincy Adams, that it's not the purpose of the United States to go out and chase foreign monsters, that there should be a foreign policy based on a partnership of sovereign republics. You know, until we reach that point, I think we will be confronted with a situation where there are strong forces in the United States and elsewhere naturally, but in the United States very much, who want to maintain this idea of a predominant role in the world. The global NATO is an expression of that. That was just cemented sort of at the recent NATO summit in Washington. And that just doesn't work, because the world is not an unipolar world anymore. It's already multipolar. I never liked that word multipolar, because it still implies the presence of geopolitics. And I regard geopolitics as a real evil mindset, which led to 2 world wars in the 20th century. And it does have the idea that you have blocs against other blocs and nations against other nations. And recently, one of the best diplomats of the United States, Chas Freeman, made a speech public, which he gave to at Cambridge University, where he said he has a better idea of describing it, not multipolar, but multinodal, meaning, you know, that these different, what people call poles, are in reality nodal points where many sophisticated and multiple relations are, and each of these countries, who is the center of such a node or nodal point, has a variety of quite differentiated relations to other countries. So each major country brings in a whole network of such connections, and therefore it's much more complex. And I think that makes a lot of sense to look at it this way. In any case, you know, I think that the biggest question of war and peace will be, can the United States, you know, find the pathway to its best historic tradition as a republic or not? If the United States tries by hook or by crook to maintain a dominant position as the world hegemon, I think a clash will be inevitable and leading, in the worst case, to thermonuclear war. So I think we are still in a mortal danger. This very horrible decision by Scholz to declare that he will implement the decision of the United States to put long-range missiles into Germany is just a no cannot be accepted. This is a revival of the middle-range missile crisis of the 80s, but in a much, much more dangerous environment, where all the communication channels which existed then no longer exist. All the disarmament agreements have been dismantled. So we are sitting there, on the edge of an escalation. Let me just say this. I have issued a call for something which I call a council of reason. This is the idea that, we need urgently some people, mostly of an older generation, who have been in government in different countries, who have been in high positions in the military, in civil service, in art, artists, culture, science, who have some important contribution to resolve this present world crisis. And I have called that people should help us to find these people all over the world and create something which I have preliminarily called the Council of Reason, of people who should just bring their expertise into the situation by counseling governments, by bringing forward their views. And the reference points, I said, over the course of history, there were many such bodies for different topics, for different times, different issues, like the Council of Florence, which managed to get the unity of the Christian Church, at least for a short time. Very importantly, that you had the Peace of Westphalia, which ended the 30 Years' War, where representatives of all the war parties were discussing for 4 years to come to peace. This was the beginning of international law. Then you had the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which helped to resolve the wounds of the apartheid period. And these are reference points, where people can step forward and help. Now, one important qualification would be that, for example, people of the older generation who still remember, either from direct experience or from the stories they heard from their parents and grandparents, what the horrors of 2 world wars were in Europe, and why we absolutely must avoid anything which could lead to a third and probably final world war. So I'm asking you, the viewers of this program, help us to seek out such individuals and make suggestions. And if you know them, help us to contact them, because I think the international discussion would greatly profit from having well-meaning, wise people from all countries of the world to step forward, because I think we have a crisis like we had never before. And I think we really have to look out for any moral and intellectual resource humanity has produced so far. So that would be my question for all of you.
And if you have just joined us, welcome to the Manhattan Project of the LaRouche Organization. You've just been listening to Helga Sepp-LaRouche, the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. She was answering questions from a webcast that occurred earlier this week. Now, for those of you watching on YouTube, we are about to leave that virtual building and we are going to Rumble. You can follow us there by clicking onto the link that appears now on your screen, at the bottom of the screen, and you'll be able to continue to be part of this dialogue. So a Council of Reason has been discussed by Helga Sepp-LaRouche just a few minutes ago. An international association of those that would dare to assert that the power of ideas properly advocated and placed is greater than that of armed force. This needs to be assembled in many nations, modeled on such things as the Council of Florence of 1439, which Helga referenced, done by Nicholas of Cusa, and or as such councils were once assembled in what became America, the colonies that became America 250 years ago, in town halls and eventually in continental congresses. What we are dealing with right now in the United States is a treasonous bipartisan faction in the United States. You may as well call it the war party